Unauthorized use may result in legal liability. I heard Emma's weak voice over the phone, her breathing labored, her words broken and faint. "Dad, help," barely a whisper. A chill ran down my spine. "Where are you, baby? What happened?" But there was only silence in response, just the rustling of fabric and a ragged breath. I wasted no time. Opening the tracking app, I located Emma's phone on the outskirts of the city in some abandoned district. My heart pounded so hard that I could barely hear my own thoughts. 15 minutes later, I was there. An old warehouse, a dim streetlight, the muffled hum of distant traffic. I pushed the door open and saw her. Emma lay unconscious on the cold concrete floor. I rushed to her side. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, and dark needle marks spotted her arms. But she had never used. Never. My hand trembled as I checked her pulse. Weak, but there. Then I saw the bruises on her wrists, her split lip. This wasn't just an overdose. Someone did this to her. And someone was going to pay. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The car sped through the dark streets, and I stole quick glances at Emma, barely breathing in the back seat. "Hold on, baby," I whispered through clenched teeth, but my phone in the passenger seat remained silent. Damn emergency lines were overloaded, and the on-call doctor wasn't picking up. 2 minutes to the hospital. 2 minutes of hell. I burst through the emergency room doors, carrying her in my arms. No one even had time to shout at me before the doctors rushed in, yelling orders, grabbing a stretcher. I refused to let go of her hand until they physically pushed me away. "Are you the father?" A doctor's voice, firm and professional. "Yes. Do whatever it takes." And then came the waiting. An hour. 2. I had no idea how much time had passed. I just sat there, hands clasped together, staring at a single point on the floor. When the doctor finally emerged, I shot to my feet. "She's alive," he said, his face grim. "Overdose. Injection marks. Bruises." A shudder ran through me. "When will she wake up?" "Soon. We've done all we can. Now we wait." I entered the hospital room. Emma lay pale beneath the Ford drip, but her breathing was steady. I sank into the chair beside her, running a hand through her hair. "Who did this to you?" I whispered, though I already knew she wouldn't answer yet. She woke just before dawn. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the moment she saw me, she let out a soft sob. "Dad." I leaned closer, feeling the rage inside me rise like a tide. "I'm here. You're safe." "Who did this?" She stared at the ceiling, gathering the strength to speak. "It was Mom. She took me to that house." I clenched my fists. "What house?" "Big, luxurious. There were rich people. They were partying, drinking, sniffing." Her voice trembled. "I didn't know. I thought Mom just wanted me to meet new people." And then she swallowed hard, eyes squeezing shut as if afraid to recall. "They started touching me. Groping, grabbing. Then someone shoved a drink in my hand. I drank it, and then I waited, silent, even as my insides burned. I only remember being dragged away. 2 men. It's all blurry. A room. They injected me with something, said disgusting things, laughed. They wanted to." She couldn't finish. Tears streamed down her face. I covered her hand with mine, squeezing gently so she'd know I was there. Then I started feeling sick. I overdosed. They panicked, started yelling at each other, blaming each other. And then they decided to get rid of me. I barely heard the rest. My ears were ringing. My wife, the mother of my child, took her there, handed her over to those bastards. I stood up. "Dad." Emma's voice was barely a whisper, thick with fear. I bent down, kissed her forehead. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'll take care of it." I would walk out of this hospital, find that house, find those people, and not a single one of them would walk away unpunished. My phone vibrated in my hand, endless ringing hammering against my skull. She wasn't picking up. I stared at the screen, at the name glowing there, Elizabeth. My wife, the mother of my daughter, the woman I once trusted with my life. I dialed again, and again. On the 4th try, she declined the call. On the 5th, she answered. Well, Stephen," her voice drawled, slow and indifferent, laced with amusement. "You actually found the time to call." I froze. "Where are you, Elizabeth?" "Far away," she purred. I could hear the smirk in her voice. "I'm busy, actually. Important people are here." "Important people?" My teeth clenched. "Where were you last night?" She chuckled. "You really want to go there?" "Where?" "Were." You. I forced each word out, barely keeping myself in check. At a gathering. A sophisticated one, Stephen. The kind of place people like you don't belong. You took Emma there. Of course. She needed to experience adulthood. I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. What did you just say? I said it was time for Emma to see how the real world works. The actual world. Not your pathetic little morality play. My fingers tightened around the phone, nearly cracking the plastic. You handed our daughter over to those animals. They drugged her. Left her to die like garbage on the street. Silence. For a second, I thought she might have felt something. But then she laughed. Well, if she couldn't handle it, that's not my fault. I gave her an opportunity. What she did with it is on her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She's in the hospital, Elizabeth. Barely breathing. So? Her voice was bored. You were always too soft, Stephen. I took a slow breath, trying not to destroy everything around me. How can you say this? She's your daughter. She sighed, like the conversation was exhausting her. I'm with a real man now, Stephen. Not someone like you. My fist clenched. Where are you, you bitch? She laughed. You'll never find me. Not this time. You think you'll get away with this? I don't need to think. I already know. Muffled voices echoed in the background, the clinking of glasses, light laughter. She smirked again. You had your chance, Stephen. But let's not waste time. I don't need you anymore. But you'll need me. There was no anger in my voice, no pain. Only icy calm. Oh, really? She scoffed. Good luck, ex-husband. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. She had sold our daughter. For her new life. For those bastards. My fingers trembled. Not from fear. Not from pain. From rage. I would find her. I would find all of them. And they would pay for everything. I sat in my garage, leaning against the cold metal cabinet, staring at the old wooden workbench illuminated by the dim glow of a single lamp. Beyond these walls, the city carried on tires whispering against asphalt, drunken voices echoing in alleys. But in here, in this small space reeking of oil and steel, there was only one thing. Silence. Emma was in the hospital, and though I trusted no one, she was safer there than at home. The doctors would do their job, keep her stable, make sure she pulled through. And then I would bring her back to a world that had changed. A world where no bastard would ever dare lay a finger on her again. I ran my palm across the metal surface of the old workbench, then slowly reached for the shelf in the far corner. I pulled out a dusty bag from a hidden compartment behind a toolbox. It was heavy, the fabric rough and worn, the zipper frayed from time, but its contents were untouched, perfectly preserved. I unzipped it and reached inside, my fingers curling around something familiar, a Beretta M9. My weapon of choice, tested by time and hundreds of rounds. My hands moved instinctively, the motions automatic. Remove the magazine, check the rounds, slide the chamber back, feel the familiar weight settle in my grip. Everything was just as I had left it. This bag contained my entire life, the one no one ever knew about. I was a ghost, unseen but always present. I had worked in the government's darkest corridors, the kind they never spoke about in the news, the kind that handled threats no one else could. Terror plots, conspiracies, men dangerous enough to push the world toward destruction. All of them disappeared when my orders were signed. I was clean, efficient, silent. But then I met her. Elizabeth. I thought she was my way out. I thought she was the reason to walk away. To leave behind the blood, the shadows, the silent kills in the dead of night. I convinced myself I could be something else. A husband, a father, an ordinary man. That my life could be about home, work, family, instead of knives in the dark and suppressed gunshots. I was an idiot. While I was playing house, she was looking for a real man. While I was trying to protect her from the world I knew, she sold our daughter for dirty money and her new elite life. Now I was coming back. Not as Stephen, the husband and father, but as who I had always been. I set the pistol down on the table and reached into the bag again. This time, I pulled out a massive, old military knife. The blade, scratched and worn, gleamed faintly under the light. Slowly, almost ritually, I dragged it across a whetstone, listening to the quiet rasp of steel against stone, a sound from my past. This knife had always been with me. It had pulled me out of situations no one walked away from. It had sunk into flesh like it belonged there, severing tendons, breaking through bone, leaving only silence in its wake. I wondered where Elizabeth was right now. Laughing, sipping expensive wine, convinced she had one. She had no idea what was coming. None of them did. I didn't strike immediately. No, these things required patience, calculation, and cold precision. If you step into the beast's den unprepared, you become the prey. I wasn't the kind of man who played blind. Finding the house was easy. People who think money makes them untouchable rarely bother to truly cover their tracks. A few numbers to trace, a few whispers in the right alleys, a glance at surveillance feeds in the right districts. Orders for private security, high-end liquor shipments, blacked-out limos arriving at odd hours, it all pieced together like a puzzle. The mansion was perched on a hill in an elite district, hidden behind tall gates and a wall of lush greenery. Cameras dotted the perimeter. Guards in suits loitered near luxury cars parked along the curb. I remained in the shadows, watching. The music inside was muffled but steady, the bass thrumming through the ground. Inside, a party was unfolding, loud, decadent, drowning in money, alcohol, and power. Warm light poured from the windows. Silhouettes moved lazily on balconies, cigarette smoke curling into the night. I surveyed everything, professionally, without wasted movements. The perimeter was secured, but not too tightly. The guards were relaxed, arrogant, convinced no one would dare challenge them. The cameras were positioned in standard angles, overlapping but with blind spots. The fence was high, but with enough footholds to scale. I moved in closer, silent, ready. Then I stopped. A man stood at the gate. I knew his face immediately. Drunk, red-faced, his expensive but disheveled suit hung off him like an afterthought, his shirt unbuttoned, reeking of sweat and overpriced whiskey. A phone in one hand, a half-empty bottle in the other. Goddamn it, where's my damn taxi? He spat on the sidewalk, scowling at his screen. Patrick Grayson, a filthy, bottom-feeding bureaucrat who had always clung to wealth and power like a parasite. Never a major player, but always close enough to know who to bribe, whose hand to shake, where to push an envelope under the table. A hypocrite who preached morality in public speeches, while drowning in the filth of places like this. He had just walked out of the house. He had been inside. He knew what happened here, and he had enjoyed it. I watched him from the darkness. That taxi? It was never coming, but I was. Grayson swayed against the gate, mumbling to himself about how no one respected him, not even his own damn driver. He didn't hear me, didn't see me close in. He only realized something was wrong when my fist slammed into his solar plexus. The air rushed from his lungs in a strangled wheeze, the bottle slipping from his grasp, shattering against the pavement. He doubled over, eyes bulging, before I caught him just before he collapsed. I dragged him into the alley, out of sight. He tried to speak, but only managed a wet, drunken gurgle. I shoved him into the trunk of my car and slammed the lid shut with finality. Let's take a little ride, buddy. 30 minutes later, we were at my old warehouse. A relic from my past, abandoned but still standing, just like me. I secured Grayson to a steel chair in the center of the room. His arms were spread wide, handcuffed, his legs strapped to the legs of the chair. The air smelled of rust, oil, and something far worse, old, dried blood. He moaned, slowly regaining consciousness, his head lolling. His bloodshot eyes met mine. For the first time that night, I saw real fear. Do you even know who the hell I am? He croaked, pulling weakly against the cuffs. I slowly pulled my old military knife from my belt, letting the steel catch the dim light. Yeah, Patrick. I know exactly who you are. He swallowed hard, his confidence cracking. Listen. I can pay you. That's what this is about, right? Money? I leaned in close, my voice a whisper against his ear. Sure, Patrick. I could use some money. I smiled. Like, say, for a good mop and a bucket. Because things are about to get real messy. Grayson went pale. I wasn't in a hurry. I took out the pliers, grasped his index finger, and slowly applied pressure. He jerked, screamed, but this was just the warm-up. Talk. Who owns this house, and what's going on inside? I said, pressing slightly harder against the bone. D-damn. It's just a club. A private club. The rich gather there, to have fun. He wheezed, trying to jerk away, but the handcuffs left him no chance. I suddenly squeezed the pliers harder. The crunch of a crushed joint echoed through the room. Grayson howled like a beaten dog. They do more than just have fun there, Patrick. Tell me exactly what. Girls, he gasped, struggling to breathe. They bring in girls. Young ones. They keep them downstairs in basement rooms. They do whatever they want with them. Junkies, perverts. Sometimes they hold auctions. I inhaled deeply, forcing myself not to slit his throat right then and there. Who owns it? Frank Delacroix. It's his mansion. He funds everything. He has connections, a fortune. He buys his entertainment. That name, I'd heard it before. Delacroix, a billionaire, a so-called philanthropist frequently seen in the news, pretending to care for orphans, investing in social development. Have you seen her there? I asked coldly, showing my wife's photo on my phone. Grayson whimpered. She's there. I saw her. She was with Delacroix, acting like she owned the place. They were laughing. He held her hand and led her upstairs. I felt the rage rising within me. So she didn't just know what was happening there? I clarified, gripping my knife more comfortably. And no. That woman. She arranged it all for him. She brought the girls there, picked them. Your wife, Stephen. She's one of them now. Something snapped inside me. I looked at the knife, then at his left hand. Hold on, Patrick. This is going to be a long night. I worked slowly, with surgical precision. Patrick thrashed in the cuffs, his eyes darting from my face to the knife in my hand. He knew he wouldn't leave this room alive. The only unknown variable was how long he would keep breathing. Please, he rasped, licking his blood-crusted lips. I told you everything. You can just leave me. I'll disappear. I leaned in slowly, looking straight into his fear-swollen eyes. Disappear. I chuckled. No, Patrick, you're too valuable. You didn't just know about this cesspool, you enjoyed it. You used those girls while they were too drugged to move. Grayson shook his head violently, making the chair creak. No. It was a mistake. Just one time. I didn't know. I plunged the knife into his thigh. He screamed, convulsing, but the handcuffs held him tight. Just once, huh? I twisted the blade, savoring the way his face contorted in agony. Then explain why you paid for it. Why you laughed there in Delacroix's house. Grayson choked, tears running down his filthy face. Please. I made a mistake. I pulled the knife out and, not giving him a moment to breathe, sliced the tendons in his right hand. A shriek, tearing through the air. You know what's most interesting, Patrick? I asked, squeezing his palm between my fingers. All of you elite scum think money can buy everything. You use people like disposable napkins, and when the dirt becomes too obvious, you just pay it off. I pulled his finger up and severed it at the base. Grayson choked on his own scream. But you know what? I forced his severed finger into his mouth. Now you're disposable too. He tried to spit it out, but I clamped his jaw shut, forcing him to swallow. He gagged, eyes bulging, but he had no choice. Swallow, Patrick. You liked having things shoved in your mouth, didn't you? I looked at his left hand, then at the knife. Let's add some gourmet cuisine to the mix. How about fingers for dessert? All that came from his throat was a pitiful whimper. I watched as Patrick choked on his own breath, his mouth stuffed with what was once his fingers. He convulsed, trying to cough them out, but his lungs refused to cooperate, and the blood dripping from his stumps turned his struggle into a spasmodic death rattle. Come on, Patrick. I crouched beside him, observing him with lazy amusement. One more breath. You can do it. He wheezed, his eyes bulging, tears and snot streaming down his face as he shook his head, as if he could somehow shake this nightmare away. But he couldn't. His fingers wedged deeper into his throat, air no longer passing through, his lungs desperate for oxygen. But all he could taste was his own stench, his fear, and the metallic tang of blood. One last wheeze. His head lolled back, drool slipping down his chin. Grayson convulsed one final time like a fish caught in a net, then fell still. His body went limp. His mouth remained open, his own fingers protruding, swollen from saliva and blood. I stared at him for a few seconds longer, then sighed and patted his shoulder. That's it, Patrick. I smirked, standing up. You spent your whole life feeding off others, and in the end, you choked on your own filth. Poetic, isn't it? He, of course, had no response. I wiped my hands on his suit jacket and headed for the exit. It was time for Frank Delacroix. I couldn't just storm Delacroix's house, guns blazing, like some cheap action movie. These people lived in a world where anything could be bought, organs, human lives, but even they had lines they feared to cross. In their minds, there was always an illusion of control, and my job was to shatter that illusion. The explosives weren't for breaking in, they were to send a message. To make sure none of these bastards ever felt safe again, in this house or any other. I knew exactly where to get what I needed. My past had connected me with all sorts of people, and those contacts, long buried, hadn't vanished completely. When I left that life behind, I left myself a few contingency plans, just in case the world decided to throw more shit my way. One of those plans led to Mr. Thunder, a former sapper who, after his service, reinvented himself as a supplier of everything that explodes, burns, and turns bodies into unrecognizable chunks of meat. I found him in an old garage on the outskirts of the city, squeezed between abandoned warehouses. He recognized me instantly, even despite the beard and the changes in my face. "Steve?" He squinted, pulling off his protective goggles. "Man, I thought you'd retired a long time ago." "You were wrong," I replied without a smile. "I need something interesting." "I see." He dusted off his hands, stepped closer. "What kind of interesting are we talking about?" "Napalm." He whistled softly, then studied me more closely. "Sounds like someone's really pissed you off. Let's just say I don't plan on leaving witnesses." He nodded, as if he understood everything, and motioned for me to follow him deeper into the garage. "I've got a couple of cocktails that burn so hot, even bones melt. Clean, neat, no evidence." I picked the canister with the purest solution, a mix of gasoline, thickening agents, and a few secret ingredients that ensured a perfect burn. "Consider it a gift for old time's sake," Grom smirked, handing me a lighter with his signature engraving. I nodded, took what I needed, and left. Night. Delacroix's mansion. The perimeter was weaker than I expected. These bastards were too used to impunity, thinking that a few cameras and a couple of bouncers in suits were enough. I moved through the shadows, low, like a predator, closing in on the nearest guard, who was idly scrolling through his phone. The knife slid under his jaw, piercing soft tissue and exiting through the back of his skull. He didn't even have time to exhale, just slumped to the ground with a muffled gurgle. The next one stood by the gate, a cigarette between his teeth, as relaxed as if he were guarding a supermarket, not a den of monsters. I stepped up behind him, grabbed him by the hair, and slit his throat in a single, clean motion. Warm blood spilled onto my gloves, but I was already lowering his body to the ground to keep things quiet. The third was slightly more professional, patrolling the grounds, glancing over his shoulder every so often. But that didn't help him against me. I slipped from the shadows, wrapped one arm around his neck, and with the other, drove the knife into his kidney, twisting it. He wheezed, jerked, and then went still as I let his body slide to the ground. 3 bodies. 3 silent, swift deaths. I wiped my knife on one of their jackets, took a deep breath of the night air, thick with the scent of fresh blood, and moved forward. Inside the house, the real bastards were waiting. By the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late. I moved like a shadow, leaving nothing behind but corpses. The security was weak, too sure of their own safety, too used to luxury and consequence-free violence. They weren't soldiers, weren't professionals, just overfed guerrillas paid to intimidate, not to fight. They weren't ready for someone like me. I sealed all the exits, locked the back doors with chains, barricaded them with furniture from the service rooms, blocked the ventilation shafts, bricked up one of the emergency exits I knew led to the garden. They were trapped now. There was only one way out, the way I came in. When everything was set, I made my way to the basement. The staircase down was dimly lit, the air thick with dampness, something sour and rotten. Faint sobs and ragged breathing echoed in the distance. I walked past 2 guards by the door. One didn't even register the blade sinking into the base of his skull, tearing through his brain. The other let out a strangled whimper as I slashed his throat, laying him gently on the floor. I opened the door. Monsters. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Bare concrete walls, filthy mattresses on the floor, iron bars like something out of an old prison. Inside the cages, girls. Young, far too young. Some weren't even 16, emaciated, skin tinged blue from the cold, their faces swollen with bruises. Many had needle marks, punctured veins, dark welts, broken nails from failed escape attempts. I saw one, tiny, barely 14. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless. She stared right through me, as if she had already ceased to exist. Another, covered in bruises, clothes torn, sat curled in a corner, rocking back and forth. A third simply stared at me in naked terror, whispering, "Please, no." I felt something inside me break. I thought I had been angry before, when I learned what they had done to my daughter. I thought the hatred burning through me had reached its peak. But I was wrong. These monsters didn't just deserve death. They deserved suffering. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to snap right then and there. "I'm getting you out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fury shaking me. The girls stared at me, disbelieving, but when I tore open the first set of bars, one of them lurched forward, then suddenly collapsed, sobbing, onto her knees. "Don't be afraid," I repeated, helping her to her feet. "You're free." One by one, they stepped out of their cages, unsteady, trembling, too weak to move quickly. I picked one up. She weighed no more than a child, light as a broken bird. I led them out through the same halls where, minutes ago, I had slit the throats of guards. No one stopped us. I got them to the garden, hid them in the shadows, where they wouldn't be seen from the house. "Stay here. As soon as you hear the explosion, run downhill, to the road. The police will come, don't be afraid." I covered them with a tarp I found nearby, offering at least a little warmth. One of the girls suddenly grabbed my hand, her fingers trembling. "What about you?" I looked at her, then at the house, where music, laughter, and clinking glasses still rang out. "I'm going back inside." I wasn't finished yet. I turned back toward the mansion, feeling my body harden with icy resolve. My fingers tightened around the knife, and my thoughts became sharp and cold, like battlefield commands. There were still guards in the hall, but they had no idea they were already dead. They stood near the entrance, chatting, cigars between their teeth, talking about women, whiskey, and expensive cars. Stupid bastards. But one of them stood out, the head of security. Broad shoulders, square jaw, eyes sharp, not like these brainless goons. He knew what he was doing, but it wouldn't be enough. I didn't give him a chance. When he stepped aside, checking something on his phone, I slipped behind him, silencing my footsteps, closing in until I was right against him. With a swift motion, I drove my blade under his ribs, piercing his diaphragm. He tried to cry out, but I had already grabbed him by the neck, yanked him back, and knocked him out with a sharp elbow strike. His body collapsed limply onto the carpet. I hooked my arms under his and dragged him downstairs, into one of the storage rooms where the thick walls would muffle everything I was about to do to him. He came to with a coughing fit, spitting blood, just as I doused his face with cold water from a pitcher. "Wake up, buddy. We've got an important conversation to have." His eyes were cloudy, but when he realized he was cuffed to a chair, his legs strapped down with belts, a flicker of fear appeared in them. "Who are you?" he rasped. I slowly pulled out my knife, and his gaze dropped to the blade. "You know who I am. You just don't want to believe it." I traced the knife along his cheek, the movement light, almost tender, leaving behind a thin scratch. "Where's Delacroix?" He shook his head. "He's not here. He left for his private villa outside the city. There's a closed meeting." I leaned in closer. "Address." He swallowed hard. "C Club Echelon, on the coast. Entry is by invitation only." I nodded. "Good boy." From my pocket, I pulled out a photograph of Emma, taken before all this nightmare began. It was slightly crumpled, but her smile still burned into my heart. "You were here when her mother brought her in." He remained silent. I took his pinky finger and snapped it in half. He screamed. "Talk." Yes, I was here." "Who did this to her?" His breathing was heavy, his face pale from pain, but fear outweighed everything else. "The guests." "Two men. They had their eyes on her the moment they saw her. Wealthy bastards. Jonathan Raymond and Victor Marconti. The names meant nothing to me, but that didn't matter. Are they here?" He squeezed his eyes shut, then nodded. "Where?" "Upstairs. In the lounge." I pulled out his phone, shoved it in his face. "Call them down." He froze. "W what?" I ran my knife along his ear, leaving a thin, bloody line. "Tell security that those two are needed downstairs. No noise. No suspicions." He groaned but took the phone. I listened as his trembling voice relayed the message over the radio. When he was done, I smiled. "Good job." Then, with one smooth motion, I slit his throat. Now, all I had to do was wait for the guests. I stood in the shadows, next to the body of the head of security. His eyes had already glazed over, his throat a ragged, bloody mess. The room reeked of urine. Seemed his final moments were particularly stressful. Raymond and Marconti were on their way down. How kind of them not to keep me waiting. The security came first, two massive enforcers in expensive suits. One held a radio, the other lazily rubbed his neck as if he'd just woken up. They had no idea they were walking straight into their graves. "Where's Carl?" one muttered as he stepped into the room. He didn't take 2 steps before I lunged from behind the door, driving my knife into his kidney and twisting it. The second didn't even have time to open his mouth before I put a silenced round through his skull. His head split open like an overripe melon, and his body hit the floor with a heavy thud. The first guard wheezed, clutching his side, but I was already plunging my knife into his throat, robbing him of his final breath. He twitched once, then went still. Now onto the main guests. I checked my knife, wiped it clean on one of the dead men's suits, and turned toward the doors leading to the main hall, where voices were already echoing. "Where's that idiot?" One grumbled, his voice hoarse, the kind of rasp that came from a lifetime of cigars and expensive whiskey. "I don't know, but if he woke us up over some bullshit, I'm breaking his face." They stepped into the room. Two bastards, two smug, comfortable men who, just days ago, had taken pleasure in torturing my daughter. Marconi was tall, a luxury watch gleaming on his wrist, his hair slicked back like he'd stepped out of an elite magazine ad. Raymond was shorter, heavier, but with the same self-satisfied look on his face. They didn't understand what was happening right away. "Where's Carl?" Marconi started, glancing around, then he saw me. And he saw the blood. Raymond recoiled, but I was already stepping forward, slamming the butt of my gun into his face and knocking him to the floor. "Oh, come on, gentlemen. We're just getting started," I smirked, watching the color drain from their faces. Marconi bolted for the door, but I grabbed him by the hair and smashed his face against the edge of the table. A sickening crunch echoed as his nose broke, splattering the pristine white tablecloth with blood. Do you even know who I am?" He choked out, clutching his ruined nose. I drove my knife through his hand, pinning it to the table. He held. "I do. You're the bastard who tried to break my daughter." I turned to Raymond, who was crawling backward, desperate to put space between us. I stepped on his hand, grinding his fingers under the heel of my boot. No. Listen, it was a mistake." He shrieked, his eyes wide with panic. "A mistake?" I crouched, grabbed him by the hair, yanked his head up, forcing him to look at me. What part of it was a mistake? Was it my daughter's split lip? Or the needles in her veins? It was Delacroix. He wheezed, clawing at my wrist. "He called us. He gave us the girls. We didn't choose. I drove my fist into his mouth. His teeth crunched, and he screamed, choking on blood. "You just what?" I snarled, pressing my knife against his gut. "Just fuck drugged-up children because someone told you it was okay." I sliced his ear off. Raymond shrieked, his cries raw and desperate. You don't know who you're messing with." Marconi gasped, still hunched over his impaled hand. "Delacroix will kill you. He'll erase you from existence." I chuckled. "No, Marconti. I'm going to burn him." I raised my knife, and this time, I wasn't cutting for answers. I watched the two trembling bastards, drowning in their own fear. Marconti was still pinned to the table by my knife, his face glistening with sweat, blood dripping from his shattered nose onto the white tablecloth, turning it into a crimson canvas. Raymond writhed on the floor, one hand clutching the remains of his ear, the other shielding himself like a pathetic, cowering dog. I crouched beside Marconti, pulled a pair of bolt cutters from my pocket, weighing them in my palm. "You like breaking things, don't you, Victor?" I asked calmly. "Girls. Lives. Futures. You probably thought that having money made you a god?" He tried to respond, but only a choked sob escaped his lips. "No, brother, gods don't piss themselves." I grabbed his hand and snapped his pinky clean off with the cutters. His scream was so sharp it rang in my ears. The severed finger twitched on the table like the severed tail of a dying snake. "And now you know what it feels like to be broken." I turned to Raymond, who was attempting to crawl unnoticed toward the exit. "Fool." With a swift motion, I drove my knife into his thigh, and he roared in pain. "Where are you rushing off to?" I asked cheerfully. "Didn't you love it when things went slow? Savoring the process, right?" He whimpered, choked on blood, babbling about money, deals, anything that might make me stop. "Money?" I chuckled. "You think you can buy your way out of here?" I pulled my pistol from its holster, pressed it against his knee, and fired. A wet crunch echoed in the room, like a nut cracking open. His scream turned into a strangled shriek. "So? How does it feel to be the one getting broken?" Please, he gasped, shaking, gulping for air. I turned back to Marconti, who was now openly sobbing, not even trying to speak. "Oh, why so silent now?" I struck him in the stomach. Not hard, just enough to remind him he was still alive. "Let's give you a new smile." I shoved 2 fingers into his mouth and sliced the corners of his lips open with my knife, pulling them up. He gurgled, his mouth twisting into a grotesque, bloody parody of a grin, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the crimson rivers. Raymond no longer begged. He just wept, silent, defeated, understanding that his end had already come. I picked up a broken chair, snapped off a leg, examined it. How about one last trick? I rammed the wooden leg down his throat. He gurgled, his eyes bulging, blood bubbling from his mouth, but he still struggled to breathe. Instincts were stronger than reason. I stood, stretched, and looked down at them. Two rotting, worthless slabs of meat who thought they were predators, until they met me. I walked up to Marcanti and yanked my knife from his hand. You know what the most beautiful thing about the human body is? He didn't answer, just twitched when I pressed the blade against his stomach. The insides, they're so warm. With one smooth motion, I sliced his abdomen open, and his guts spilled onto the table with a wet splatter. He wheezed, trembling, staring at his own intestines like a child unable to understand why his toy had broken. Now you're beautiful, you bastard. I wiped my knife on his expensive shirt, took a deep breath, then turned and walked toward the exit. These two were no longer a problem. Now, only Delacroix remained. I ascended the stairs slowly, one hand gripping a canister of hellish fuel, the other holding my pistol. The scent of blood still trailed behind me, dripping from the knife now resting at my waist. Upstairs, it was dark. Only the glow of chandeliers and candlelight illuminated the corridor. Below, in the hall, life went on as if nothing had happened. The bloated bastards sipped expensive liquor, giggling whores perched on their laps, and the muffled hum of music floated lazily through the air. They had no idea they only had seconds left to live. I stepped up to the balcony railing, from where I had a perfect view of this nest of vipers. These creatures lounged in luxury, laughing, discussing their latest catch, arguing over who had the best merchandise. My heartbeat was slow and steady. I lifted my head, took a step forward, and, cutting through the music, growled in a voice that turned into an animalistic roar. Hey, bastards. Welcome to your own personal hell. The music stopped. The voices died down. Every head in the room turned upward. I saw the first flicker of realization in their eyes, the cold wave of fear rippling across their bloated faces. Someone froze with a drink in hand. Another tried to stand but had no idea where to run. I simply tossed the canister down. As it fell, I fired. The explosion was short but blinding. Fire erupted from the ruptured container, spraying burning liquid across the hall like a curse. Flaming droplets splattered onto the floor, onto clothes, onto skin. The first screams hit my ears. Burning men leapt up, their expensive suits turning into fiery shrouds in an instant. One slapped frantically at his face, trying to extinguish the flames, but his skin peeled off in charred flakes, exposing raw, bleeding flesh. Another, a fat man with a cigar, collapsed onto his knees, his bloated belly blistering in the heat like an overcooked slab of meat on a skillet. He screamed, screeched, clawing at himself, but every motion only stripped away more of his skin, turning him into a pulsing, blood-drenched mess. A woman who had been laughing just seconds ago was now clawing at her own face, trying to rid herself of her burning hair, her fingers sinking into the melting flesh, exposing white shards of skull beneath. They rushed for the exits, but there was no way out. They pounded on the doors, tried to pry them open, but I had already ensured they wouldn't escape. Some hurled themselves at the windows, but the lower floors were barred with iron grates. They crashed against the metal with sickening cracks, snapping bones, leaving behind bloody smears. Others simply ran in circles, burning like human torches, colliding into one another, spreading the fire further like an infectious plague. I stood and watched as monsters died, watched their laughter twist into agony, watched their pleasure turn into pure, undiluted horror. Watched them pay. I took a deep breath, turned, and walked away. Behind me, the mansion was ablaze. They burned from the inside out. The road to Delacroix's villa was dark and empty. I drove calmly, even with a sense of satisfaction, watching in the rearview mirror as the mansion blazed beyond the horizon. The devil had come for these people, and his name was me. Delacroix's villa was hidden away, far from the city, where men like him could escape the law, but not me. Security? The pathetic remnants of his empire. They didn't even know their time had run out. I cut through them like a knife through butter, leaving their bodies in the bushes, their blood soaking the expensive marble pathways. The mansion door was massive, heavy oak paneling, but it only took one good shotgun blast. I stepped inside. A surprise for the host. They were in the lounge. Delacroix, draped in an expensive robe, sipped cognac by the fireplace, his predatory face illuminated by the flames, like a cheap villain in a film about the rich who think they're untouchable. My wife sat beside him. Elizabeth, beautiful, well-groomed, a glass of champagne in her hand, her legs stretched lazily across the couch as if she didn't have a care in the world. As if her daughter weren't lying in a hospital bed, covered in needle marks and bruises. When the door slammed, they turned to me. A second. I saw it in their eyes. First, confusion. Then recognition. And finally, panic. Stephen. Elizabeth exhaled, her voice trembling. What the hell are you doing here? I came to visit my loving wife. I smiled and leveled the shotgun straight at Delacroix's face. And her new master. You're not stupid, are you? Delacroix carefully set down his glass, slowly raising his hands. Stephen, let's talk. Like adults. Adults? I nodded. Sure. Let's discuss it. How did you convince my wife to sell you my daughter? What kind of bonus package did that come with? A discount for betrayal? Elizabeth flinched. Stephen, don't be dramatic. I pulled the trigger. The shot blasted into the wall next to her head, sending shards of plaster flying. She screamed, shrieking like a rat trapped in a corner. Shut up. I reloaded. You'll get your turn, darling. Delacroix swallowed. Listen, it was just business. I smirked. Exactly. And now it's asset liquidation. Stephen. Elizabeth whimpered. Let's just talk. We can leave. I can fix this. I leaned in closer, letting her feel the cold steel under her chin. Fix it? I tilted my head. Okay, you've got a chance. I tossed a knife onto the table. There's your choice. Take it. Show me you're not like this piece of shit. She stared at the knife, then at me, then at Delacroix, who had gone pale as the marble of his fireplace. You're joking, she whispered. Oh, yeah. And it's hilarious, isn't it? She reached for the knife slowly, then lunged at Delacroix. This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, I never would have. I didn't even get to count to 3 before she drove the knife into his shoulder. He screamed, clutching at the wound, but I had already grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head against the table. She collapsed onto the floor, wheezing, struggling to catch her breath. Delacroix groaned, blood trickling from his shoulder. I sat down beside him, giving his cheek a friendly pat. You always enjoyed putting on a show for your guests, Frank? He flinched, his eyes darting around. Stephen, you know what the most popular game is? Hide and seek. I pulled out a hammer. His face contorted with terror. No, wait, crack. The hammer came down on his left knee, shattering it into pulp. Frank held, doubling over. Oh, sorry, I chuckled. Looks like you won't be running anywhere. All right, let's play hot and cold instead. I reached for my lighter and set his robe on fire. The flames crawled up his stomach, his chest. He screamed, flailing, trying to pat out the fire. It was useless. To help things along, I grabbed an open bottle of whiskey and poured it over him. The bastard went up like a 4th of July firework. Hot enough for you, Frank? I grinned. He rolled across the floor, shrieking, while Elizabeth crawled toward the door, thinking I had forgotten her. I hadn't. Oh, no. I pulled my gun and shot out both her knees. She collapsed, screaming like a slaughtered animal. I walked over, crouched beside her. You wanted to be part of high society? I leaned in closer. Welcome to its filthiest depths. Then I grabbed another bottle, smashed it, and added a little more fire to the scene. The bitch burned even brighter. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Hey, you've got a fire. A couple of important people are dying in absolute agony. Then I tossed the phone into the fireplace, turned around, and walked out, and left them to burn. A new beginning. I returned to the hospital before dawn. My hands still smelled of gunpowder and smoke. My clothes were soaked in blood that wasn't mine. But for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Emma was asleep. Her face was no longer so pale, her breathing steady. I sat beside her, took her hand in mine, and for the first time in days, allowed myself to smile. It's over, baby girl, I whispered. They'll never touch you again. A week later, when she was strong enough to walk, I made my decision. We're leaving. She looked at me, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. Where? Somewhere no one will find us. Somewhere quiet. We left. We drove to my sister, Linda, who lived in a small town by the lake. No mansions. No luxury cars. No dirty money. Just peace. I bought a house by the forest, with a porch where you could drink coffee at sunrise. Emma started to heal. She walked along the water, read books, smiled. The real Emma, not the girl who had been through hell. In time, I got to know the locals. One of them was Clara, a kind, quiet woman who worked at the vet clinic. We became friends. And then, it became something more. Something real. She never asked about my past. And I never lied to her. I just started fresh. Emma and I never talked about what had happened. We just lived. And that was enough.